Section 55 of L'Assommoir. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. L'Assommoir by Emile Zola. Translated by Ernest A. Visitelli. Second part of Chapter XII. Her heart was swelling with the effort she made not to own that she had had nothing to eat since the day before. Then she felt her legs give way. She was frightened that she might burst into tears, and she still stammered. "It would be kind of you. You don't know. Yes, I'm reduced to that. Good Lord, reduced to that." Thereupon the Lorilleuxs pursed their lips and exchanged covert glances. So Clump Clump was begging now. Well, the fall was complete. But they did not care for that kind of thing by any means. If they had known, they would have barricaded the door, for people should always be on their guard against beggars. Folks who make their way into apartments under a pretext and carry precious objects away with them, and especially so in this place, as there was something worthwhile stealing. One might lay one's fingers no matter where and carry off 30 or 40 francs by merely closing the hands. They had felt suspicious several times already on noticing how strange Gervaise looked when she stuck herself in front of the gold. This time, however, they meant to watch her. And as she approached nearer, with her feet on the board, the chainmaker roughly called out, without giving any further answer to her question. "Look out, pest, take care. You'll be carrying some scraps of gold away on the soles of your shoes. One would think you had greased them on purpose to make the gold stick to them." Gervaise slowly drew back. For a moment she leant against a rack, and seeing that Madame Lorilleux was looking at her hands, she opened them and showed them, saying softly, without the least anger, like a fallen woman who accepts anything, "I have taken nothing. You can look." And then she went off, because the strong smell of the cabbage soup and the warmth of the workroom made her feel too ill. Ah, the Lorilleuxs did not detain her. Good riddance. Just see if they opened the door to her again. They had seen enough of her face. They didn't want other people's misery in their rooms, especially when that misery was so well deserved. They revelled in their selfish delight at being seated so cosily in a warm room with a dainty soup cooking. Boche also stretched himself, puffing with his cheeks still more and more, so much indeed that his laugh really became indecent. They were all nicely revenged on Clump Clump for her former manners, her blue shop, her spreads, and all the rest. It all worked out just as it should, proving where a love of showing off would get you. "So that is the style now, begging for 10 sous," cried Madame Lorilleux as soon as Gervaise had gone. "Wait a bit, I'll lend her 10 sous, and no mistake, to go and get drunk with." Gervaise shuffled along the passage in her slippers, bending her back and feeling heavy. On reaching her door, she did not open it. Her room frightened her. It would be better to walk about. She would learn patience. As she passed by, she stretched out her neck, peering into Père Bru's kennel under the stairs. There, for instance, was another one who must have a fine appetite, for he had breakfasted and dined by heart during the last 3 days. However, he wasn't at home. There was only his hole, and Gervaise felt somewhat jealous, thinking that perhaps he had been invited somewhere. Then, as she reached the Bijards, she heard Lalie moaning, and as the key was in the lock as usual, she opened the door and went in. "What is the matter?" she asked. The room was very clean. One could see that Lalie had carefully swept it and arranged everything during the morning. Misery might blow into the room as much as it liked, carry off the chattels and spread all the dirt and refuse about. Lalie, however, came behind and tidied everything, imparting at least some appearance of comfort within. She might not be rich, but you realized there was a housewife in the place. That afternoon her 2 little ones, Henriette and Jules, had found some old pictures which they were cutting out in a corner. But Gervaise was greatly surprised to see Lalie herself in bed, looking very pale, with the sheet drawn up to her chin. In bed, indeed? Then she must be seriously ill. What is the matter with you? Inquired Gervaise, feeling anxious. Lalie no longer groaned. She slowly raised her white eyelids and tried to compel her lips to smile, although they were convulsed by a shudder. There's nothing the matter with me, she whispered very softly. Really, nothing at all. Then, closing her eyes again, she added with an effort, I made myself too tired during the last few days, and so I'm doing the idle. I'm nursing myself, as you see. But her childish face, streaked with livid stains, assumed such an expression of anguish that Gervaise, forgetting her own agony, joined her hands and fell on her knees near the bed. For the last month she had seen the girl clinging to the walls for support when she went about, bent double indeed by a cough which seemed to presage a coffin. Now the poor child could not even cough. She had a hiccough, and drops of blood oozed from the corners of her mouth. It's not my fault if I hardly feel strong, she murmured, as if relieved. I've tired myself today, trying to put things to rights. It's pretty tidy, isn't it? And I wanted to clean the windows as well, but my legs failed me. How stupid. However, when one has finished, one can go to bed. She paused, then said, Pray see if my little ones are not cutting themselves with the scissors. And then she relapsed into silence, trembling and listening to a heavy footfall which was approaching up the stairs. Suddenly, Father Bijard brutally opened the door. As usual, he was far gone, and his eyes shone with the furious madness imparted by the vitriol he had swallowed. When he perceived Lalie in bed, he tapped on his thighs with a sneer, and took the whip from where it hung. Ah, by blazes, that's too much, he growled. We'll soon have a laugh. So the cows lie down on their straw at noon now. Are you poking fun at me, you lazy beggar? Come, quick now, up you get. And he cracked the whip over the bed. But the child beggingly replied, Pray, Papa, don't strike me. I swear to you, you'll regret it. Don't strike. Will you jump up? He roared still louder. Or else I'll tickle your ribs. Jump up, you little hound. Then she softly said, I can't. Do you understand? I'm going to die. Gervaise had sprung upon Bijard and torn the whip away from him. He stood bewildered in front of the bed. What was the dirty brat talking about? Do girls die so young without even having been ill? Some excuse to get sugar out of him, no doubt. He'd make inquiries, and if she lied, let her look out. You will see it's the truth, she continued. As long as I could, I avoided worrying you, but be kind and bid me goodbye, Papa. Bijard wriggled his nose as if he fancied she was deceiving him. And yet it was true, she had a singular look, the serious mien of a grown-up person. The breath of death which passed through the room in some measure sobered him. He gazed around like a man awakened from a long sleep, saw the room so tidy, the two children clean, playing and laughing, and then he sank onto a chair, stammering, Our little mother! Our little mother! Those were the only words he could find to say, and yet they were very tender ones to Lalie, who had never been much spoiled. She consoled her father. What especially worried her was to go off like this without having completely brought up the little ones. He would take care of them, would he not? With her dying breath, she told him how they ought to be cared for and kept clean. But stultified, with the fumes of drink seizing hold of him again, he wagged his head, watching her with an uncertain stare as she was dying. All kinds of things were touched in him, but he could find no more to say, and he was too utterly burnt with liquor to shed a tear. Listen, resumed Lalie after a pause. We owe 4 francs and 7 sous to the baker. You must pay that. Madame Gaudron borrowed an iron of ours, which you must get from her. I wasn't able to make any soup this evening, but there's some bread left, and you can warm up the potatoes. Till her last rattle, the poor kitten still remained the little mother. Surely she could never be replaced. She was dying because she had had at her age a true mother's reason, because her breast was too small and weak for so much maternity. And if her ferocious beast of a father lost his treasure, it was his own fault. After kicking the mother to death, hadn't he murdered the daughter as well? The two good angels would lie in the pauper's grave, and all that could be in store for him was to kick the bucket like a dog in the gutter. Gervaise restrained herself not to burst out sobbing. She extended her hands, desirous of easing the child, and as the shred of a sheet was falling, she wished to tack it up and arrange the bed. Then the dying girl's poor little body was seen. Ah, mon Dieu! What misery! What woe! Stones would have wept. Lalie was bare, with only the remains of her camisole on her shoulders by way of chemise. Yes, bare, with the grievous, bleeding nudity of a martyr. She had no flesh left. Her bones seemed to protrude through the skin. From her ribs to her thighs there extended a number of violet stripes, the marks of the whip forcibly imprinted on her. A livid bruise, moreover, encircled her left arm, as if the tender limb, scarcely larger than a lucifer, had been crushed in a vice. There was also an imperfectly closed wound on her right leg, left there by some ugly blow, and which opened again and again of a morning when she went about doing her errands. From head to foot, indeed, she was but one bruise. Oh, this murdering of childhood! Those heavy hands crushing this lovely girl. How abominable that such weakness should have such a weighty cross to bear. Again did Gervaise crouch down, no longer thinking of tucking in the sheet, but overwhelmed by the pitiful sight of this martyrdom, and her trembling lips seemed to be seeking for words of prayer. "Madame Coupeau," murmured the child, "I beg you." With her little arms she tried to draw up the sheet again, ashamed, as it were, for her father. Bijard, as stultified as ever, with his eyes on the corpse which was his own work, still wagged his head, but more slowly, like a worried animal might do. When she had covered Lalie up again, Gervaise felt she could not remain there any longer. The dying girl was growing weaker and ceased speaking. All that was left to her was her gaze, the dark look she had had as a resigned and thoughtful child, and which she now fixed on her two little ones who were still cutting out their pictures. The room was growing gloomy, and Bijard was working off his liquor while the poor girl was in her death agonies. No, no, life was too abominable. How frightful it was, how frightful. And Gervaise took herself off and went down the stairs, not knowing what she was doing, her head wandering and so full of disgust that she would willingly have thrown herself under the wheels of an omnibus to have finished with her own existence. As she hastened on, growling against cursed fate, she suddenly found herself in front of the place where Coupeau pretended that he worked. Her legs had taken her there, and now her stomach began singing its song again, the complaint of hunger in 90 verses, the complaint she knew by heart. However, if she caught Coupeau as he left, she would be able to pounce upon the coin at once and buy some grub. A short hour's waiting at the utmost. She could surely stay that out, though she had sucked her thumb since the day before. She was at the corner of Rue de la Charbonnière and Rue de Chartres. A chill wind was blowing, and the sky was an ugly leaden grey. The impending snow hung over the city, but not a flake had fallen as yet. She tried stamping her feet to keep warm, but soon stopped, as there was no use working up an appetite. There was nothing amusing about. The few passers-by strode rapidly along, wrapped in comforters. Naturally enough, one does not care to tarry when the cold is nipping at your heels. However, Gervaise perceived 4 or 5 women who were mounting guard like herself outside the door of the zinc works. Unfortunate creatures, of course. Wives waiting for the pay to prevent it going to the dram shop. There was a tall creature as bulky as a gendarme, leaning against the wall, ready to spring on her husband as soon as he showed himself. A dark little woman with a delicate, humble air was walking about on the other side of the way. Another one, a fat creature, had brought her 2 brats with her and was dragging them along, one on either hand, and both of them shivering and sobbing. And all these women, Gervaise like the others, passed and repassed, exchanging glances, but without speaking to one another. A pleasant meeting and no mistake. They didn't need to make friends to learn what number they lived at. They could all hang out the same signboard, Misery and Co. It seemed to make one feel even colder to see them walk about in silence, passing each other in this terrible January weather. End of second part of Chapter 12. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.